All right, let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Avoid Risk When Blocking on Social Media and the First Amendment Intersect. My name is Megan and we are very excited to have you here today. Now, before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items that I want to take care of. First, all attendees are on mute, but please feel free to use the question function to submit questions. There will also be time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. And lastly, after the webinar, we will be sending out an email to share additional resources, the recording of this webinar, and the slide deck. Now that that's taken care of, I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Brian Carter. Brian is the Senior VP of Sales and Marketing here at Archive Social, and just in general, a really great and knowledgeable guy. Today, Brian will be going over how you can verify your identity on social media, how to ensure your accounts are secure, the need for policies and moderation, and blocking on social media as it relates to the First Amendment, and how you can cover your entity. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Brian.
All right, great. Thank you, Megan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for carving some time out to spend with us today. As Megan mentioned, up front, we're going to be covering a few things, but it's all going to be rooted into what you can and can't do online as it relates to moderation and blocking. But since this is the start of a new year and things are starting out fresh, we also want to make sure you take time to kind of step back and set yourself up for success for the rest of the year. It seems every few weeks we do one of these webinars, we're seeing some of the same questions and concerns people have, but I will say at an increasing frequency as it relates. And I think that's a byproduct of just a fast moving social media landscape and legal landscape. So step one, what I suggest for everybody on this call who is likely managing your social media presence for a public agency or perhaps for a school district is take kind of step back and let's make sure we understand what your agency's identity is online. Now, we're using this cute 5 R's thing, and you'll get a copy of this webinar. I encourage you to take notes. But step one, start of a new year, do a little recon work. This is truly as simple as combing for your agency name with the name of the platform and Googling it. So if you're ABC agency or the town of somewhere USA and type in Facebook and Google it, or go to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and use their search feature on the platform itself, figure out, do you understand where all your agency's social media presences are online? Step two, do a little bit of research. Are they official? It is not uncommon that you might be getting spoofed online or somebody, your predecessor or somebody else with your agency created an account for a special event or a special moment in time and forgot all about it. But if those are still out there, you just want to make sure you're understanding who owns it, who has access to it, and are these official sites that we want out there. The third R we're encouraging you to do is to create a register. Now, this is as simple as a spreadsheet. So don't make it complex. You don't need people's login info. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Just a simple spreadsheet with the basics. What platform, what's the account name, and what are the names of emails of anybody who has access to it. This is a great time of year to be doing this because good list hygiene is your friend. And then put it on your calendar to do it again 6 months from now. That's just making sure you're keeping sort of those first 3 R's. What are our presents? Are they ours? Who owns them? And what may happen as a result of doing all that registration and research is you may find something that is not real. You want to make sure you report it. You don't want to let imposters define your presence online. This will all lead to making sure you maintain a good presence and a consistent moderation policy. And then lastly, consider retiring some pages. You want to get real about what you can reasonably accomplish with the resources you have. I think we are all busier today than we were 12 months ago, especially on social media. Most agencies have an average presence of 3 to 5 pages. Concentrate your presence can help the pages perform better, increase your page relevance, And it also helps you manage contributions and moderation with a little less wear and tear on your staff. So I would also encourage you to create the rules, not an R that's listed here, on how someone who wants to start a new page. I'm sure there are a lot of folks at your agency who thinks, why don't we create a new Twitter account for this or a Facebook page for this? There's a little pro tip from us, combing the 3,000 clients and 5,000 agencies that we represent. Invite them to start a guest post on your main page and see if they can keep up with content frequency. If they can do that over a period of 2 to 3 months, hey, maybe it makes sense that you allow them to create their own page. If they can't, you've saved yourself a little bit of work and wear and tear along the way. So 5 R's, make sure you verify your agency's footprint online. Then the next step you want to do, I told you I'd come back to this, is you want to make sure you're securing your accounts. And a byproduct of that, by the way, is you're also securing your reputation. So once you've laid out your agency's social media landscape, put the right amount of security in place to ensure they stay safe. From an accountability standpoint, you might be surprised that Facebook can limit or even shut down your page, even if just one admin is found out to be a dummy profile. Don't risk it. Don't go through the hassle of trying to reactivate a page that Facebook shut down. It's not uncommon that agencies in the past have used dummy profiles. Our strong recommendation is you don't use a dummy profile. And candidly, accountability is going to start with you. Also on Twitter, it's a common misperception on that if you have a Twitter account, it means sharing your password. This isn't true. Both Facebook and Twitter offer multi-user login options. So that leads me to a little bit of from a security standpoint. You don't want to share logins. You don't want direct logins. You want to have that accountability in place, but you also want to use strong passwords. And then go to two-factor authentication. You do not want to set up two-factor authentication without first setting up unique logins. This can cause headaches because sometimes the two-factor is sent to the wrong person, and believe me, we've seen it happen. We've received the phone calls like I'm not getting my special code texted to me, and that's because you're likely having some shared login. So secure your accounts, secure your reputation, and of course, archive your social media if you're not. The public records laws are all about what's in the communication versus what's the mode of communication. So if a record is an email, it's a record. You're probably archiving your email. Same is true in social media. It's true in all 50 states and several international countries as well. And just one thing to keep in mind as we talk about today is that public record law in almost every instance were written to be future-proofed. So when you read them, you'll see they're all designed to focus on the content over the format. So whether that format is your Facebook page or a carrier pigeon or a town crier, they're all viewed as equal in the eyes of public record law. You want to just make sure you're keeping an archive of what is actually going on. And when we get into the moderation and the blocking, you want to make sure you're keeping a record of every post and every comment, because once it's gone, it's gone. So it's really hard to prove why you did something to somebody or why you moderate something if you don't have a copy or evidence of what it is they did and what your policy was at the time they did it. And then lastly, because we're at the start of a new year here, we're finding that a lot of folks didn't realize that both the Coronavirus Relief Fund as well as the CARES Act was extended officially to the end of this calendar year. Why that's important to you as a public agency is we have seen public agencies who have had increased use of social media around COVID-19 and coronavirus, successfully using these funds for both supporting archiving functionality like Archive Social or alerting functionality, because retention of COVID-19 related social media public records is not something that existed before COVID-19 existed. So it's something that is created a new spend requirement for your agency. So Uh, uh, Important for you to know at the beginning of this year that access to those funds have been extended. Previously, it ended at the end of last year, but good news for those of you at an agency. If you're unfamiliar with CARES Act and how to submit for funding, we do have some checklists and some resources on our website that can help you there. So,
Awesome.
yeah, go ahead, Megan. Sorry.
No, you're fine. So you mentioned shared logins, and I'm sure people have passwords all over. I know I do, and there can be so many that you have to remember. So kind of why is that important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And boy, I think about all the accounts I have online, Netflix, Amazon, all that, and managing those usernames and passwords. It makes sense that people say, look, here's our login to our Facebook account and here's our password. All admins use the same thing. It just makes life easier. What makes life easier on one end can complicate the heck out of it on another end. Let me explain why. As I mentioned up front, we work with nearly 5,000 agencies' social media accounts connected to our archive. You have to remember that when you're in your system of record creating posts, you may see your staff. The public only sees your agency. So if you're sharing logins, you're sharing blame. Now you're seeing a cute little screenshot on your screen right now where we blurred out some stuff. This was a very real public agency sheriff's office where somebody no longer with the sheriff's office still had that shared login and decided to have some fun at the agency's expense online and posted some less than favorable words. We've used emojis here. You can use your imagination what happened there. Strongly discourage anybody from using shared logins.
Awesome. And so with that being said, I mean, what are some things that we can put in place to help keep us consistent?
Yep, great. So we're talking about the beginning of the year here, Megan, and for any agency listening in along with us today, great time to review your social media policy. We're going to talk about moderation and blocking momentarily here. Step one to all of that, and you're going to hear me reference it quite a bit, is to make sure you're consistently adhering to your posted policies. So if you have one, guess what? It's annual tune-up time. The legal landscape is fast changing. I know agencies who have not updated their policy in several years. There is a lot of legal challenges and changes that have happened. Once a year, take time to kind of refresh both your internal and your external policy. Your internal policy, all that's doing is that's painting the lanes for your employees and gives them direction. So if you're not telling someone what's expected of them, you can't expect them to do what you want online. And all we ask you to do is to make sure you're not authoring this in a silo. Use all your legal resources to make sure you're not forgetting anything. The external policy is the same way. If you don't establish parameters, you can't expect folks to stay within them. And by the way, just having a policy isn't enough. We're going to talk about it in a second. You got to make sure you post it publicly and follow it consistently. We know that some listservs and Facebook pages that we're familiar with repost their terms of use every 3 months automatically. You might want to consider kind of a similar policy or framework, or what we've also seen agencies do very well is when they're responding or moderating content per the terms of our policy that you can find here, and then therefore you're sort of showing the consistent application of your policy. So just remember, social media is a public forum, so start with a similar set of rules. So all good things to think about when you're creating sort of that external policies for your constituents. And then when I said about making sure that they're visible, you got to publish it. So post it on your page or post it on your website. If you're curious at all about how some other agencies have done a nice job with this, I ask you to look at the City of Seattle's Facebook page and the City of Austin, Texas Facebook page. They both redirect to their main website page where their terms of use and policies are very clear there. So those are just two good examples that you can use for yourself to see how other folks have done it, because your policy might be long. You don't want to forget to put it in one of the pages update it in Facebook, but forget to do it in Twitter, centralize where your policies are and redirect to that URL. And best practices of any external policy is to set up parameters for what requires a response, just so folks know, just because they comment doesn't mean they're going to get a response. And it just helps people understand what to expect in terms of response times. And you can also, we've seen some great agencies use FAQs as well to answer questions that they may see more common than not.
So is a policy enough? Like we're all set after that, would you say?
Boy, wouldn't that be nice? Just having an internal and external policy be enough. No, you also need to make sure you have a comment moderation guide, or at least some guidelines if guide feels too heavy of a lift. It's really a policy, and that policy should be all about balance. So it should allow you to moderate inappropriate and irrelevant content while still respecting relevant opinions and First Amendment concerns. And you want to make sure you train all staff members. So if you have anybody that you're inviting to participate on your social media pages, just make sure that they understand what the internal policy is, what the external policy is, and what your comment moderation policy is. That keeps everybody sort of in the same swim lanes. So if you do have to moderate, you're sort of all speaking from this proverbial same hymn.
Before we move on really quickly, can you reference the 2 Facebook pages examples that you suggested everyone take a look at again?
Yeah, sure. That would be the City of Seattle's Facebook page, Seattle, Washington, and the City of Austin, Texas, their Facebook page. Those are 2 off the top of my head that I think do a really nice job of showcasing policies.
Do they have good FAQ samples as well?
I'm going to have to go back and look, Megan. I don't have a good example off the top of my head of one that I want to send somebody to. I'd like to double check it first. Maybe we can send that as a follow-up to attendees here.
Absolutely. And for reference to a good comment moderation guide, we can share ours as well, and any other suggestions you may have. Awesome.
Right.
So speaking of moderation, could you go ahead and just unpack that for me and all that entails?
Yep. So we're gonna, this is sort of where the bulk of our deep sort of content and guidance is gonna come today on this webinar. So there are really 3 types of moderation online. First is pretty straightforward. It's deleting. That's the act of removing someone's comments from your social media accounts. And once deleted, no other user can see or access that content. The other type of moderation that can happen is hiding. That's blocking a user's content from showing up on your page without outright deleting it. So no notification or other indication is sent to the person who posted the comment that they have been hidden. We're going to talk about whether hiding is a good idea in a few minutes. And then, of course, blocking. That is restricting certain users' access to social media accounts, which are otherwise open to the public at large. So once blocked, these users cannot access or comment on your social media unless you unblock them. So those are the 3 types that we're really going to unpack a little bit more.
So I know that for me personally on my social media, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I see that I definitely ignore and even, go ahead and unsubscribe from some people. And I can only imagine that that's amplified in the public sector. So do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, here, the best advice that I can give you is you're going to be dealing with some trolls here. So social media activity is on the rise for the public sector. I will tell you that at Archive Social, our archive is just over 350 million records strong. We got a pretty good handle on the social media landscape. The activity accelerated over the last 12 months. So the increased activity increases the likelihood you're going to deal with some trolls. And the reality is platforms of public agencies, you're going to become magnets for conspiracy theorists, inappropriate or off-topic comments that distract citizens from the important information being shared. So the best advice I could give you is brace for it, but more importantly, prepare for it. Because if you're not prepared for it, you may do something that is really not in your agency's best interest. And as a public official, you're likely going to be subject to comments and content that is pointed, disparaging, critical, mocking, unfair, cheap, false, offensive. You, of course, can call out this speech and respond to it, but as a general matter, though, you can't suppress it for good reasons. It's all about the First Amendment. But to know whether or not you've caught yourself a troll, you've probably all experienced someone who's deliberately trying to get you upset, may act entitled, may exaggerate a lot, tries to make it personal, tries to get you as a person fired up. I like these last two. Oftentimes they can't spell, and I don't know why that is. I just think they're so eager for the response that they don't even care what they're posting, and they often do so in all caps, the equivalent of yelling online. So know that there's going to be increased social media activity on your pages, which means increased likelihood that you're going to catch yourself a troll.
All right, so say that I have got myself a troll. I mean, can I just block them or delete their comment?
Yeah, first of all, I understand the temptation. I can empathize with someone who's feeling on the end of a personal attack, that it can be really tempting for a public official to moderate certain comments and posts by blocking the user or deleting their comments. You have to know that there are risks associated with those reactions. The ramifications of moderating or regulating social media content, A, without a policy in place, and B, without legal justification, can lead to a litany of consequences. These consequences can take the form of bad online brand perception or perception about your agency. It could take the form of bad press if it covers outside of your social media pages. It could come with unwelcome and unexpected financial surprises in the terms of fines or lawsuits. And let's not discount the just emotional stress and wear and tear to your team. So you could get sued as an individual. Your agency could get sued as an entity. Both you and your agency could get sued. All that stuff you don't want to mess with. So if you're not thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about what type of moderation you're doing, you could run into some unintended consequences here. And look, let's take a step back and put this all in perspective. We're not trying to put a lot of fear in you, but you as a public official handling a social media presence, we figure 1 in 4, 1 of 5 of you have probably had a public record request related to something covered on your social media, but we think 9 in 10 of you have dealt with a troll. And the reason why that's so important is if you take a step back and put it all perspective, the likelihood of you personally facing a First Amendment lawsuit is candidly pretty low, but it's not zero. And the chances are only going up. We've been watching this stuff for a while now, but there have been more than 100 lawsuits and claims we could find just in the US and just against local government public agencies and school districts over social media moderation issues since January 2019. So if you think about that, in the last 24 months, over 100 lawsuits. I'm not counting anything that happens at a federal level. So put that number in perspective. Once a week, one of your peers is facing a lawsuit or a claim that one of their online community members or constituents felt unjustly moderated online. Now, sometimes they get thrown out, sometimes they get settled, sometimes they go all the way to court.
So, is there anything that you actually can moderate without fear online?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. That there are certainly categories or content that are not entitled to full protection under the First Amendment and a few other categories here. First, obscenity and direct threats. That's and I want to be really clear on what a direct threat is. That's a serious intent to commit an act of unlawful violence to a particular individual or group of individuals. That has no First Amendment protection. Posting somebody else's IP or copyright, that also has no First Amendment protection. Suggesting or encouraging illegal behavior or illegal acts, that has no First Amendment protection. And then, of course, defamation. Most First Amendment attorneys, of which I'm not one, would tell you to understand clearly the difference between an opinion and defamation. The example we like to use is saying Mayor Bob went to prison is a much different statement than saying, I think Mayor Bob is a crook. Thinking Mayor Bob is a crook is an opinion. Stating that Mayor Bob went to prison as a fact is defamation. So those things on the left-hand side from obscenity through defamation, those are all things that have no First Amendment protection, and you have a little bit more freedom around moderation. Another way to think about sort of threats is if the police can charge someone based off their comment, it ain't protected. There is also other forms of speech that are covered under a different treatment under the law, and they can be excluded and removed from government pages. So commercial speech is one of those. So somebody, you post about weather advisory and someone decides to advertise their snow plow service on your government page, you can remove that. That's a commercial solicitation or advertisement that has no place on a public agency page. Anything around malware or phishing, anything where someone posts personally identifiable information. I heard John Smith had COVID and he went into the mayor's office. That's PII. That's commenting about somebody's health history and personal identifiable information. Cyberbullying, of course. And I think a big area is something that's completely off topic or is spam. Now, if you think about spam, you may have people in your community who every time you post, they say the same thing in response to that. I'm gonna use an exaggerated example. If every time you post about a school closing or an adjustment to your curfews, and somebody says there are aliens in Area 51, when are you going to comment on it? If they are repeatedly saying the same thing, that fits the definition of spam. You can moderate that because you've given them a chance to voice their opinion, and they're just continuing to say the same thing over and over again. And oh, by the way, it's also off topic. So those are a few areas, Megan, where people can feel a little freer to do some moderation.
Yeah, so it definitely sounds like there's some areas that you might want to be cautious of. Could we talk about those a little bit?
Yep, so there are some areas of caution around moderation. I told you I was going to come back to hiding versus deleting. So we have seen where some agencies view that hiding can be viewed as an acceptable alternative because it feels like less aggressive to the commenter than entirely deleting their comment. We've also heard that some agency moderators believe that if the citizen has no idea their comment was hidden, it's going to diffuse the situation. They're not going to continue to post angry responses, or they're not going to try to amplify their dissonance. Here's the truth, though, hiding can be worse. So if you look at the example on your screen, let's say commenter A posts something objectionable, you decide to hide it. You're not ready to delete it. If commenter B, who happens to be a friend of commenter A, posts a valid and helpful response in reply, due to the original post that their reply is nested under, their reply is likewise hidden. You potentially discriminated against two people when you meant to diffuse a situation. So in the eyes of the law, deleting or hiding are the same as viewpoint discrimination. Our recommendation is to try to avoid hiding altogether. Often it's best to ignore, but if you need to delete, make sure you have valid rationale and you're capturing the why you're doing it and having your legal team support. And when I say legal team support, that they signed off on your policy in your comment moderation guide, just so that you're all kind of tracking the same way. By the way, you also want to make sure you are consistent on how you apply your moderation. There was an interesting study out of a joint study out of Stanford and Cornell, where they said where people take extreme action against small infractions can actually heighten responsive behavior to it. So here's an easy way to think about it. They found that if two users wrote posts of like similar quality, but one user's post got deleted or hidden, and the other one didn't, that user would probably be encouraged to write something worse in the future. So you just want to make sure you're being super consistent on how you're moderating everything. And then we're going to go to the big caution area, which is blocking. If you're using your agency page to represent your public office's opinion and to communicate information, the First Amendment prohibits you from blocking people just because of their viewpoints. Multiple courts have held that social media accounts used for official purposes are public forums within the meaning of the First Amendment. So if you're not aware of that, a public forum is established when the government invites members of the public to speak in a space that the government owns or controls. So courts have held that the interactive features of social media accounts used for official purposes are making those accounts public forums because they enable members of the public to speak, for example, by replying to tweets or posting comments. And while there are different types of forums, whether it's limited or not, one rule that applies to them all is the First Amendment, and that is you cannot stop people from speaking in them on the basis of their viewpoints. Even if you don't like what they're saying, doesn't mean they don't have the right to say it. The rule against viewpoint discrimination ensures that people aren't excluded from public discourse simply because their views are controversial or disagreeable to others. It also helps ensure agencies don't insulate themselves from the opinions of people that they're supposed to represent. So you can't block people from your agency page and without careful consideration. Are they protected under the First Amendment? If they are, you can't do it. If they aren't, you got a little bit more flexibility to do it. And are they violating your terms of use or policy? Our best advice always is to ignore it. But in those cases, they're not protected under the First Amendment. They're violating or repeatedly violating our terms of use policy. That leads you to blocking. Now, one thing I'll say about blocking is the consequence for violating the terms of your policy should be tailored to the violation. So you should take into account whether they can correct the issue or do they keep violating the same policy in the past. A pretty safe way we've seen agencies do it is to let somebody know that they violated the policy, and therefore you're sort of letting the community as a whole aware that you have a policy. So a simple example of that might be, Mrs. Smith, per our policy, you can view at the following URL. Your comment is in violation of that. We ask that you please edit or remove it. If not, we're going to have to delete it. So you're given sort of a mute or soft approach, and then if they don't do it, you've sort of matched the violation to the sort of the consequence, if that makes sense. So another way you could do it is only block them for brief periods, sort of putting them in detention for a little while. Those are things you should discuss with your agency. Again, best bet is to ignore, but in some cases you're left no choice but to block somebody. And the reason why we're being so cautious about this, I mentioned in the news, but just like a few examples up here on your screen, which are relatively recent, and I know that maybe the font's a little smaller on the source of some of these, but we've had everywhere from school districts get records requests about what Twitter user superintendents are blocking. You see a lot of elected officials trying to fight block posts. the bottom right there, the city of Woodland Park, Colorado, and the police department faced a federal First Amendment lawsuit over blocking and deleting comments. And I saved the bottom left for last, that Irvine, California spent $80,000 in legal fees after a former mayor blocked a resident on her personal Facebook account. 80 grand of taxpayer money fighting it, only to settle it for another 40. 120 grand simply for blocking a resident. This is why we're so cautious and sort of give that guidance about being very thoughtful and intentional before you block somebody.
So I'm guessing, Brian, if even if I was a public agency and I had a solid policy and lawyer support, I probably wouldn't want to delete and block anyone. And I'm sure a lot of our customers, mostly feel that same way after seeing some of these examples. Am I right?
Yeah, so you would not be surprised, Megan, how often we hear people say, well, good news is I don't delete anything, or we don't block anybody. And while that might be true as as an individual, that is not what the data is telling us. Again, we have 3,000 clients representing 5,000 agencies, almost 30,000 social media accounts connected to our archive. Step one, in response to we don't delete anything. You may not, but that doesn't mean the people commenting on your page aren't deleting their own comments, which could be deleting comments nested underneath theirs, which, by the way, are also public records. We, back in August of this past summer, in August of 2020, we took 500 of our accounts, our client accounts. We looked at over 55 million social media posts they had made in our archive. 4 million of those posts could no longer be found on the networks themselves. It's roughly 1 in 12 records have been deleted. Now imagine if those were the subject of a record request or an investigation or an e-discovery. Now, as it relates to blocking users, 68% of our clients currently have users blocked on their social media pages. These are the same clients telling us they don't block anybody, but maybe they had shared logins. Maybe someone who no longer works there did it. They have no idea that they have individuals blocked on their page, nor do they likely have a record of why that individual was blocked to begin with. So why is it so important to keep track of blocking, why you block somebody and what they did to block them? Number one, did you actually block somebody? We had last month a school district in Ohio mention they never block, ban, moderate, or remove anybody from their social media. They just choose to ignore it. But they had dealt with an influx of issues where people were claiming they had been censored. For some reason, people weren't seeing their own comments or seeing their own posts. Archive Social has a block list functionality we're going to show you in a second. The district could prove that they did not block somebody by showing them what their block lists actually were. And they, in fact, had not blocked anybody. So that's one way a block list can help you. The second way a block list can help you is if you did block somebody, you got the audit trail. You know what your policy was, what they did to do it, and what their content, and by the way, what their history of content has been. So therefore, the consequence of what you did could match the severity of the action they took. So I've mentioned that Archive Social has block lists. Most folks know about Archive Social as literally keeping an archive of your social media. Well, who you're blocking is a part of your social media. So we're going to show you a short little sort of run through here of what block lists look like on your screen. So this is an example of what a client might see in our archive. So once Megan hits play here, in our archive, it's just a data type to us where you can ask to see what your block lists look like. And while this video goes forward and you want to see your block list, it'll go into the archive. You can go by each page. In this case, we're looking at Murfreesboro, Tennessee Police Department. You see a lot of names blocked. We're interested in Caleb Banks. You look to the left, we got all the metadata associated with Caleb. And then we can go into the archive and say, I want to see everything that this individual has posted in our social media accounts on either all my accounts or a very specific account. In this case, I want to see what Caleb did to be blocked from the Murfreesboro, Tennessee Police Department. And now you get a list and a history of what Caleb has done. So I want you to think through that use case scenario as a public agency person managing 3 to 5 Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and all that, and you get hit with somebody saying, I was blocked unfairly, First Amendment violation, why did you block me? And not having access to this type of information. This is why we've released this block list feature. We see where the lawsuits are going. We know it's a public record, and we want to arm you in 20 seconds to be able to pull, here's a history of what this individual did, who blocked them, why we blocked them, and what their content history has been. So I know we've thrown a lot of content and information your way here about things to better prepare and protect your agency. So I have written down, I got to get an FAQ example of an agency, but there's something else we're going to send you for attending today. And that is a semi-annual social media checkup page. So a lot of things I covered. It's just a way for you to handily check the little box and see if your agency did this. We also have a ton of questions that were submitted here, and we're going to run through a bunch of these questions. So these are questions that people have submitted in advance or during our talk here today. So right before I start answering the questions, I'm going to ask Megan to launch a little poll for our participants here today. So for those of you on the phone, we've shared a bunch of information. If you want to see a more detailed demonstration of that block list feature, which comes with all of our new Archive Social packages, or if you want to better understand record compliance, find out if your social media or even your website is putting you at any risk, or if you just want to talk to us, check the appropriate box. If you want it all, check all of the above. We're going to leave that up for a minute or two, but I'd like to, Megan, in the interest of time, maybe jump into some of the questions that people have submitted in advance of today's webinar.
Absolutely. So the first question I have for you, can you discuss muting as well as blocking on social media?
Great question. So I talked a lot about blocking, not muting. So I mentioned how you can run afoul of First Amendment if you block followers for criticizing them or deleting their comments. But there are some legal precedences that those First Amendment arguments are moot if the government official simply hit mute. So what do I mean about that? You do not lose your First Amendment rights upon taking office. You enjoy the same rights of speech and assembly as your critics do. So what that means is there's nothing that requires you to respond or listen to what somebody has to say. They just have the right to say it. In fact, that came out of U.S. District Court Judge Naomi Buchwald, who presided over the case of 7 people going the first lawsuit against President Trump. That judge said officials are free to ignore speech. That is not an infringement on the speaker's rights. What you can't do is restrict the right for them to advocate for themselves. So you have a little bit more freedom muting somebody, but that being said, keep in mind what the point of your agency's page is. Social media is meant to encourage interaction. So the most successful entities on social medias are the ones that face critics head on. So before hitting mute or hitting delete or hitting block, embrace the opportunity to ask questions, provide information, correct misunderstanding, and maybe show a different side of the story. What we have seen is even very vocal critics can become civic advocates or even boosters if their concerns are heard and they feel like they've had a chance to express their opinion. Great question.
Awesome. Next question for you. Can you block on multiple sites and pages if the offense is on one site that you manage?
Yeah, wow, another great question. So like I said, the typical agency we talk to, manages maybe 5 different social media accounts, and maybe you have a troll on one page and it's just easier for you to block them across all your pages. As it comes to blocking, again, not without full support, But look, if the person is posting the same content to multiple sites, then yeah. But a carte blanche block across all your pages for an offense on one is probably going to end poorly. Here's something that comes top of mind with me. Maybe that citizen is upset at your health department, but they might be the biggest fervent supporter of your Parks and Rec department. You don't want to block them across all those if the issue is with the health department. Just carefully think through the why and the reason. Again, you might be clear if the person keeps talking about aliens at Area 51 on every page. That's a little different than somebody who has a very specific issue or concern with one agency department. So you might be clear to block on one, but it might be ill-advised to do so on the other.
Awesome. Could you explain where the line between a personal social media account, like Facebook, and a professional one is?
Yeah, this is a great one, especially with that lawsuit in Irvine, California, where a mayor blocked somebody on their personal page. So, you don't surrender your First Amendment rights by entering in public service. So you can maintain a personal social media account and use it to discuss your family, your golf game, your thoughts as a citizen about world affairs. And like any other user of social media, you can block followers from a personal account for candidly any reason you want to. But if you use your personal social media account for official purposes, the game changes a little bit. Our advice, if you don't want to be bound by the First Amendment, don't use your social media account as an extension of your office or your agency. So don't use it to make announcements about your official responsibility or solicit opinion or viewpoint on legislation. Don't talk about official meetings. Here's what we have seen in the legal landscape. If they're deciding whether or not you used your account for official purposes, courts are likely to look at the way you use your account, not just the label you give it. In other words, if you simply declare that your social media account is personal, but then you're doing something else with it, it doesn't matter what you called it. So they're going to look, did you communicate information about your agency? Did you use government resources in connection with your account? In other words, are you using your government supplied phone or laptop? Does your staff or any member of your staff help you manage your account? Are you doing it while you should be on the proverbial time clock? So all those things should come into your mind. If you're doing that, you could potentially run afoul of it. The best advice is simply keep a clear separation between the two. Good question.
Awesome. And before I ask the next question, I just want to remind everyone, if you want to answer the poll, to do so now, because I will be closing that down here in a few seconds. So Brian, question for you that came in. As a K through 12 school, I'm assuming that we are considered a government institution as regards the First Amendment and free speech versus blocking.
Yep, a public, it says a K-12 school, so I'm going to assume it's a public K-12 school versus a private K-12 school. But if you are a public K-12 school, you are essentially under the same record retention laws as a government agency and First Amendment free speech ramifications as well. In fact, in the last year or so, we've seen 10 specific public K12 First Amendment lawsuits around blocking or deleting content on social media. They were in the states of Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, and by the way, I have a cheat sheet here, Virginia, Washington, and Idaho. Those are just a sampling of some of the states we've seen K-12 districts being brought to court around blocking or deleting content on social media. And it's a shame. The reality is this pandemic and these districts having to deal with this remote environment and the volume of social media activity is up, but so is the intensity of that dialogue. And our school district employees are fatigued, and one slip of the mouse and blocking someone can result in a far bigger consequence. And this is outside of K-12, but it's also in education. If you've not followed it, there is an insane ongoing battle between PETA and Texas A&M over First Amendment concerns. February of 2020 last year, the first case was settled for $75,000. Only at graduation this year for Texas A&M to block and delete comments again from PETA, and PETA has subsequently filed a brand new lawsuit that is now going to trial. So it is alive and well in education and public K-12 in particular.
Nice. Next question for you. Is it ever appropriate to respond to false information we may see on other social media accounts?
Okay, I think I understand the question. So maybe your agency is seeing false information about your agency on a social media account that your agency doesn't manage. I think that's one way to interpret that question. So I would say if you're not the owner of the page, I mean, you could always comment like, if you'd like some accurate information, please come to our, our official page, and you can find that information here. Thank you for commenting. You could always do that, but I think it's just, you got enough going on your current page. It's probably best to ignore it until it's brought to one of the community pages that you actually manage yourself. Now, if it is on your page, it's always good to redirect them to the source of accurate information. Plus, if you reply and correct, the rest of the people on your community are kind of watching what you do. It showed that you're listening. It showed that you reinforced your sort of commitment for accurate information, and that if everyone behaves nicely, the right information gets out, and everyone can see how professionally you handle it. I would reserve that for pages you personally manage versus chasing it down on pages you don't manage. That would be my personal guidance on that.
Awesome. Next question. Should government agencies silence public comments?
Yeah, so by silence, do you mean not allowing commentary would be the follow-up clarification question I'd have. So, we don't recommend posting with not allowing people to comment back in. We want to empower and protect open dialogue. And again, social media is meant to encourage interaction. The most successful public entities on social medias are the ones that are engaging with their clientele, their critics or their constituents, and even those opposing viewpoints. So again, I mentioned it earlier, but before you hit mute or delete, embrace the opportunity to ask questions, provide information, correct misunderstanding. Again, vocal critics can become supporters and boosters. And by the way, the more you do it and the more consistently you engage, you also build a fan base. And sometimes they do the work for you. So if you have some passionate fans and somebody decides to create some turmoil, sometimes those forums can self-police themselves as well. And Megan, I know we're going to run a little short on time here, but I've been scanning some of these live questions here. One, I want to make a clarification. I was using an example for defamation where I said Mayor Bob went to jail. I should have said versus calling Mayor Bob a crook. It's not defamation if Mayor Bob did indeed have a prison record, a sentence on his record, if it was indeed fact. The example I was using was just trying to show the difference between stating a fact versus a statement of opinion, but somebody wanted me to clarify that that was indeed not defamation. So if Mayor Bob had not went to jail and I said he went to jail, that is defamation, because I'm stating it as factual even though it was not factual. So that's one comment I wanted to clarify. Another, we have a few clients that are on the webinar and asked to all of our accounts have access to block lists. Great question. Right now it is Facebook enabled. Twitter is just around the corner. 90% of our clients, 90% of our accounts are Facebook accounts. It's the most popular. So we went there first. Twitter is right around the corner. That's another great question that somebody wanted clarification on. But yeah, even if you're a current client of Archive Social, block lists are turned on and active in your archive right now. And one more question, Megan, that I want to answer and address is somebody asked the question about, hey, we're in a very small town or community, and oftentimes We know the people that are posting. Maybe we see them at the post office or we see them at the bakery. How do I moderate when someone's going off topic around that? Um, Public record laws don't care how big your community is. The likelihood of you being, sued is pretty low probably in that smaller community. But again, ignore it if you can. But if you feel you must respond, do it politely and gently. Kill them with kindness, as they say, because your community is you're gonna hear it. And I think that's good for small towns and large municipalities. Is you're reinforcing your standards for appropriate behavior, but you're still showing that you're listening and people are seeing how professionally you handle it. Um, but I think it's a fair response to say something like, "Hey Joe, I know we all feel passionate about certain issues, but I'm nudging you here with this friendly reminder about our community policy." I think that's a really polite, gentle way by just saying, "I'm nudging you with a reminder about our community policy." And then if Joe decides to ignore that gentle nudge and do it again, well, now you've sort of set yourself up you tried it with kindness the first time. Now you're going to have no choice but to moderate it. So we're at the tail end of today's webinar. There were a ton of questions we didn't get to. We will do our best in our follow-up to try to address those questions for you. Some were just so specific. I don't know they would appeal to everybody on our webinar, but again, thank you for joining us today. Seems like every few days we get questions around this topic, which is why we wanted to do this webinar. If you're not a client of ours, you can do a free trial of Archive Social. We invite you to talk to us. We're happy to help you learn about the public record laws requirement for your state, walk you through maybe some specific legal cases in your geographic area, or maybe what other agencies that are near you that are using us, and really help you think through what would you do in the event of a record request or a First Amendment lawsuit. So thank you so much for joining us here today. We hope you got some value out of this. We know your time is valuable. And thank you for all you do. It's a lot of work keeping communities informed and engaged in these unique times that we're all dealing with. So I hope you're also extending yourself a little bit of grace um, in the role that you have. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.